As you can tell on Woodworking with Wes today, we're making doors. And I wanted to show you what I do to sand a door all the way through to paint shop ready. These are paint grade doors. They'll be painted white. We're making them out of poplar frames, MDF panel core. And this is a typical shaker, square style and rail square shaker design. We're going to sand it. We're going to put an 1/8 inch round over edge on it and get it ready for the paint shop. And I'm going to show you the steps I do. Now the first thing I did, I've already done one step. The first thing I did is I took and I had it flat sanded. You can either use a drum sander or a wide belt sander, but I had it flat sanded so that it's all flat sanded to 13/16. As I make the doors, when I first start out making the doors, I make them at 7/8 of an inch. And that way, when I get ready to flat sand them, I have enough to sand down to 13/16. And that's the size I want to have, the thickness I want to have my door when I'm all done. I've also gone through and puttied any of the joints that might have any gaps or anything like that, so that when I go in the paint shop I don't have any voids. And so I've done that so that it dries. But we're going to start off and we're going to sand 120 grit. We're going to sand our whole door 120. We're going to put a route on it. Then we're going to come back and sand 150. This is the sandpaper that I use on my palm sander. So let's start there. I always start on the back side first, work my way around to the front. After I sand the back, I sand the edges. And then off to the front. Now I always sand and end up on my cross grains. I do my end panel first so that when I sand my final sand, I'm just sanding the long straight grain. That gives me a better joint when I do that. Okay, nice and smooth. I was taught as a young apprentice it was okay to see a joint, but it was never okay to feel one. Now that we do a lot of painting, you definitely don't want to feel your joint, because when you get done, you don't want to have any joints or grain showing. So it's got to be perfectly smooth for a paint grade door. Next thing, route the edge. Now we're getting ready to do the very final sand before we go in the paint shop. But in the process of doing the final sand, that's when we do our handwork. We have a sharp edge back here along our panel. We have a sharp edge on the back side of the door. We have sharp corners. And on the front side, we have a sharp edge on the inside of our route. We want those sharp edges to be smoothed over. We also want to sand our routed edge and make that perfectly smooth all the way around. And we'll do that first. Now, I always take a leftover piece of sandpaper, double it over, sand the inside of my route there. It doesn't have to be a lot because this is the back side. On the inside, there's not a lot of work going into that. But then we get to this edge. Now we just sanded our door 120. I'm going to take my 120 grit paper that's already been used a little bit, and I'm going to hand sand my back edge and my front edge. We're going to smooth off that route. We're going to break that back corner and just make that nice and smooth to the touch. And then I always sand my corners a little bit so they're not quite as sharp as just a cut edge. That gives me a nice soft corner for my paint, and it is less prone for damage if it's got a little bit of a softer edge there. So I go all the way around the door, like that, front and back. This is an 1/8 inch round over. When I sand this edge with just my sandpaper, we call that a hand round. A little bit less than an 1/8 inch. Soften our corners again. Go back up here. And we'll do that same thing all the way around, making sure we get our route on the front. Soften our corners. Back on this edge. Hand round on the back. Sand our route real good so that our route is nice and even all the way around. Look that corner a little better there. Okay, now we've got that part done. We've got to sand this sharp edge here. Now, this is not hard. You just take it there and put your sandpaper and just rub it along there, and you're just breaking that edge. Not even as much as the hand round that we did on the back side. All you want to do is break that edge. You still want it to be crisp. You just don't want it to be sharp. One thing you need to be careful now, on a paint grade door it's not as critical, but if this was a stain and lacquer door, you don't want to get your sandpaper down there and scratch your panel. That'll show up when you stain and lacquer. But on a paint grade door you can be a little less cautious. But on a stain and lacquer door, you want to make sure that you don't scratch your panel when you're sanding your stile and rail edge. Okay, we've got our edges all nice and sanded. Make sure everything feels good before we do our final sand. And I always do the sander as the final sand, because as you sand with your hand paper, you scratch cross grains and things like that. You want to make sure you have all of that taken out in your final sand with your sander. Okay, here we go. Now, you'll notice that I sanded my frame first and my panel last. Worked my way around. I always do that. On the front side, I sanded the face of my panel prior to my assembly of my door, because you can't get down and sand in here properly once the door is put together. So this surface here has already been sanded to 150 prior to assembly. Now all we have to do is sand our frame 150. And there we are. Now I have an air sander. This is a Dynabrade, which is a sander that I like and have used for a long time. We'll check and see if this is available at Amazon and put you a link on. I'm sure you could buy this at Amazon if you want. But also, you can get the same kind of palm sanders in electric sanders. So a palm sander works great because it isn't just a back and forth movement or anything like that. It really gives a nice polished sand. I've used several different kinds of sanders over the course of many years. A palm sander is a great sander to finish up your doors. And there it is. We'll blow that off and it's ready for the paint shop just like that. A lot of sawdust. If you're going to play in the wood, get used to it. We'll see you next time when we're making more sawdust on Woodworking with Wes.